What is our inner child? We may hear this term here and there. Oh, your inner child is activated, or your inner child needs to come out to play, or your inner child is angry or repressed or sad. But what does it mean? It means a number of things. And in a moment I'm going to share a short story with you, but before I do, allow me to go into why inner child work, why paying attention to those parts of us that have been denied and have been repressed and have been neglected actually matters as adults, particularly in our adult intimate relationships. And so the inner child is that. It's that part that yearns to play, that part that yearns to be seen and desired, that part that didn't have its needs met when younger, that part that developmentally was moving through the world and needed healthy feedback, needed reassurance, needed to be witnessed without judgment, without shame, and the projection of someone else's fears that little boy or girl looked up to, not only for safety, but for love, for attention. And when I say that part, I'm referring to our psyche, our personalities, the way that we relate to the world, our identities. And this matters. It matters because how we see the world as a young person shapes how we see the world as an adult, how we choose to give and receive love, how we see ourselves, aka our self-worth, how we love others, how we retract when it gets a little too difficult, how we deal and cope with pain and challenge and difficulty, and how we experience the things in our lives that matter to us, that we value. Wealth, adventuring, having a family, how we move through the world and perceive ourselves in terms of our status, our hierarchy in society. All of this is formed during our developmental years. Maybe you experienced physical, emotional, sexual abuse when you were younger. Maybe you were neglected, you weren't seen. Maybe you were lost in a sea of siblings. Maybe you grew up in poverty. Maybe you were raised by a single parent. Maybe you were raised by parents who were too busy for you. Maybe you just felt alone. Whatever your childhood experiences and the accumulation of those experiences, they form a subset and a substructure of your personality. And they form your identity. And we take that into our adult lives and into our adult relationships, and we become the people that we are. And more often than not, we develop these coping strategies, these ways of dealing with difficulty and pain and challenge as young people. And because that is familiar to us, we continue to apply the same strategies in our adult lives. However, those strategies are often hypervigilant. They're often in excess as children. And applying them to our adult relationships and our adult lives doesn't make too much sense. Well, it does on one hand, but it doesn't on the other, because they're a little too excessive. Sometimes a lot. And those coping strategies that we created for ourselves, that our brain, body, nervous system, psychology, social selves created for ourselves, came from a place of needing to feel safe, being very small in the world, having to protect at any cost. And that hypervigilance is still with us as adults. And what it may do is push others away. It may pull you away. It may have you feeling needy or desperate. It may have you compensating for the way you feel about yourself in excess ways. It could be alcoholism, numbing, it could be drugs, it could be the incessant pursuit of your title, it could be how many people can you sleep with. Whatever the compensation to help you feel better about the parts of you that you don't approve of, or that you don't validate, or that you don't love, because that's the experience that you had when you were younger. It's the experiences that I had when I was younger. And inner child work gives form to these parts of our minds that are almost immaterial and unreachable. It gives us an opportunity to see ourselves deeply and differently. And that form gives us access and tangibility, accessibility and tangibility, and that's empowering. We then can empower ourselves to make changes in our lives in alignment with our values and the truth of who we are. And it was just last week where I had an intense conversation with my mother, and it brought up a lot of stuff. And I actually shared this on my wife's podcast, Over It and On With It, Christine Hassler. And we went deep and we unpacked that in real time. Literally 2 hours after this discussion with my mother, we went into it, raw and real and unscripted. And you can watch it there as well. And the link is just here. And a few days later, a big conversation with my father. And what I found was that I was triggered by my mother's conversation, the conversation with my mother, but I wasn't triggered with my father, the conversation I had with him. And there was a level of relief that came from that, because it was like, wow, I'm really growing here. And even with my mother, I was able to process that very, very quickly. Remember, we're all human. We are imperfectly perfect and perfectly imperfect. And as I reflected on those two conversations, those two situations, I looked at myself in the mirror and I thought, I'm proud of you. I said it out loud, I'm proud of you. Because man, have I come a long way. Because in the past, I'd be holding on to that shit for so long. Angry, taking it out on others, angry at myself, not wanting to speak to my mother or father, resentment, rage, regret, guilt, shame, all of it, cycling, compounding on itself. Now, am I free of trigger? No, not at all. But I've grown. And I've grown as a result of the deep inner child work that I've done. And this weekend, Friday, October the 8th, my wife and I, Christine, are taking our next live cohort of inner child participants. And let me tell you, I'm grateful. This 2.5 day workshop is life-changing. This is level 1. We also have a 2.5 day workshop at level 2. Now, we are probably going to be doing this one last time for a while live. So my invitation to you is, if you want a life-changing experience that is going to evolve every area of your life, because there's a little guy or girl there that is responsible for keeping you hyper safe and keeping you from living the life you want, because it's better to err on the side of caution as opposed to just being out there and being exposed. At least that's the way part of our inner child thinks. We're going to teach you how to access this part of you. We're going to teach you how to connect to this part of you, to love this part of you, to have a intimate communion with this part of you, or these parts of you, I should say. And having connection to that whole version of self will grant you access to a greater life. I look forward to seeing you there. Power and blessings.